Welcome to Pros and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Hello and welcome to the Pros and Cons podcast, a podcast by emerging writers for emerging writers. And today we have one of these special episodes when it's really just me, Matan, your host for today, doing something rather unusual. Sometimes we will send one of our members to the far corners of the earth to dig up one of these masters for you to listen to. And today we have a special friend of mine, someone I actually know from real life, and someone who happens to be a very successful writer herself. So, listeners, I'm proud to introduce to you the one and only Sapir Englard.
Hi.
This is the point where I prop you up, Sapir, and I tell our readers that you are the author of the MILLENNIUM WOLVES series, which is quite a massive hit on an app.
Yes, so the book is published on a German app that is called Galatea. It belongs to a company called Inkit GmbH, which is the mother company of the app. And Inkit itself is a website for, like Wattpad and Fiction Press, like those platforms that you can upload your stories for free. And Inkit has this Galatea app, which is for, premium books that you can purchase to read. My book is published there, has been published there since 2019, I want to say.
Wow.
Or 18, 19, something like that. It's been very popular on that app. It's kind of funny. It was like the second story put on the app.
Hold on, you were the second story on that app.
Yeah.
You're like a founding member.
Because of that, it was kind of an interesting thing because the app helped me grow, but also my book helped the app grow. So it was like, all two things that went in parallel with one another. So yeah, it was. It's there. Check it out.
Well, that's super exciting. I'll tell our listeners since this is a podcast for speculative fiction, that Sapir is right in our alley. Sapir writes fantasy with quite a bit of emphasis on romance. We actually met each other at work, right?
Yes, we did.
we met each other at work. I don't know if I mentioned it maybe 100 times, but I do teach teenagers English. And Sapir, you also taught teenagers English. And,
yes, I taught teenagers English and Hebrew literature. Those were my areas.
So that's how I met Sapir. And I remember pretty early it came up that she writes. And I thought, it would be fun to bring her on the pod. And make you a temporary but honorary member of Precipice Fiction. So let's get into it. So many questions I want to ask you, but I'm going to start with something a bit deep. You're a successful writer. It is undisputable. You are a successful writer. You've had 125 million reads on the app. And more than that, you've also been traditionally published. You have books in France, right? You are a writer, but still I find like a lot of emerging writers kind of struggle with the imposter syndrome. So I wanted to ask you, at what point in your life or career did you fully embrace I'm a writer?
I think it was only very recently, to be honest. So just a little background, I've been writing books since I was about 15 years old. And, I never felt like I was good enough. I felt like I had a lot of room to, get better. And especially when my book, The MILLENNIUM WOLVES, when it became like a really big hit on the app, that was when I started to really feel this imposter syndrome. I was like, yeah, that's not my book or something like that, or
Wow.
Yeah, it was kind of a really rough time. I felt like this book. Okay, newsflash, I wrote this book when I was 19 years old. It was 9 years ago.
Wait, you wrote it 9 years ago, but you started publishing it in 2019.
Yes, and
Okay.
that means that I was in my 20s already. And by the time that I was in my 20s, I really did not like that book that much. I mean, it was fine. It was just a book I wrote, and I did not expect it to be successful whatsoever. So when it became a success, I was kind of like feeling, no, that's not the truth. That's not correct. This book is not worth that much.
Wow.
Yeah, and I really struggled with it until really pretty recently when some deals are in the making for another book of mine that I'm very proud of. So the point that I started to let go of this imposter syndrome was when I realized that, yes, my writing is good, and this new book that I'm working on and is going to be published at some point in the future, you know, it was kind of the affirmation that I needed that I was actually good, you know, like the confidence boost that I needed because it was something that I lacked. And now I can say like with a wholeheartedly, that I'm a writer, that I'm an author and not feel like it's a fraud, you know.
So I gotta ask you, you've really had success, and it's becoming harder for you not to admit that you are in fact talented because it's staring you in the mirror every day. But what kind of advice would you give to writers who haven't had that success yet? Maybe nothing they wrote ever got published. How would you recommend they deal with this imposter syndrome?
Well, I think that the best way to deal with these kind of things is give your book to other people to read, I mean, all of my books, ever since I was young, I posted online for free and people just read and commented, sometimes bad comments, sometimes really good comments. But it was my way to also grow as a writer and also as a person because it helped me understand, yes, this is my writing. It might not be perfect, but, I can get there, I don't want to say self-assuredness, but it's more like it takes a lot of motivation and inspiration to get where you want to be. And it's really hard. I mean, I know where I was like 9 years ago, 10 years ago. I was in a completely different place, and it was very hard for me to even imagine that I will get where I am right now. So, but I kept on doing stuff. I mean, I didn't think about it too deeply. I was just like, yeah, I have this list of things that I need to do. This is going there, this is going there. And I just, I went for it very straightforwardly without like looking sideways. So my best advice, I guess, is just kind of like cut out the background noises in your head that tells you that you're not good enough.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easier said than done, obviously, but then
Yeah, for sure.
for sure, but then just like
But it's
focus
true.
on, yeah, but like focus on your craft. I mean, when I write the books, I'm just so invested in my own characters and worlds, and I don't even care if it's good or not. At some point, I do sometimes care, but just to go for it and find the solutions to any problems that I might have.
It feels like you deal with the syndrome by just burying yourself in the craft. Like, you know what, this is not about my feelings. This is about improving as a writer and just being a writer, focusing on it, writing. I'm guessing that you write on your good days, I'm guessing that you write several times a week. And
Yeah.
I know personally, I've heard from you about some crazy ass schedules that you've put for yourself. And I'm just watching from the side thinking, oh my God, is she going to kill herself writing that much? Like, how is she going to? And then you show up out of a pit 3 weeks later. Yeah, finished. What? That's
Yeah.
impressive.
Yeah, I don't know if it's impressive. I think that every writer has their own pace, and each person should have the pace that works for them. For me, I know that once I get into it, like past few days, I've been editing and writing like crazy from morning till evening, like no stops whatsoever. However, not many people can do that as much as I can't like slow down, because slowing down cuts my thought process, while slowing down for
Mm.
other people might be, yes, it's time to process,
Oh,
So for me,
awesome.
it's like, I feel like when it's fresh in my mind, I have to like go for it right now, right, like for a good amount of time, but like fast. And it's not necessarily for everyone, it really depends. It's a very individual way of thinking, I guess, this whole pacing issue.
Wow. Well, I think that's some really good advice. Find your pace and stick to it. If you're a more sort of a ponderous kind of writer and you need to write and digest, that's fine. But I
Yes.
think Sapir, you are really carried by the momentum that you're
Yeah.
writing, and that really carries you through the drafts, I suppose.
Yes.
I'm the write and rewrite guy. So I write and then I rewrite and I write and I rewrite. And that's how this is the little dance I have with my manuscripts until
Yeah, well,
someone
there are pros and cons for that as well. Each like way of writing has their own pros and cons. So
Uh, honestly, I'm really eager to talk about your writing because you've sent me a lot of stuff. You've sent me three different things,
yes,
and we're gonna start with the big one, which is Millennium Wolves. Now, I think that as a writer, you write very different things. Like the letters and Millennium Wolves, while both good, could have almost been written by two different writers.
yeah.
But I love that about your writing because it shows you're like a Swiss Army knife in a way. But what I really want to ask, I'm going to focus on Millennium Wolves, like I said I would, because that's the big one at the moment. Your, I'm just going to say, the sexual tension is freaking electric in that book. Like I could feel it crackle through the page, and I'm like, oh my God, like it's been 20 pages. Where's this? When is this going to explode? And I know that for a lot of fantasy writers, let's be honest, a lot of us are huge nerds. Like I'm a huge nerd. I don't think I've ever been in some of these situations, and yet a lot of the times we gotta write these really charismatic, sexy, attractive people, confident in ways that few people really are. So I wanted to ask, how do you approach a romance in a novel, and how much inspiration do you take from other great romance novels, or from life, or from stories you've heard, or do you just like conjure all of it from your own imagination?
Well, to touch on your last point, I think that, no one can really conjure everything. Everyone is inspired by other people, whether they like it or not. I believe that a lot of the romance books that I read influenced me one way or another without me even realizing it. I even sometimes when I go back to the Millennium Moves and I read a few chapters, I'm like, yeah, I see that like I wrote a sentence that is very similar to one in the other romance books that I read, and then like I didn't even notice it at the time of writing. Um, Speaking of romance in general, I mean, I don't know. When I wrote the Millennium Wolves, I was funnily enough inexperienced whatsoever in everything.
Oh wow, really? You were
Yeah.
you were 19, right?
I was 19. I was like a late bloomer in my own right. And I did not even, I barely even kissed a man. I did not know
Wait,
anything.
so you've never dated the leader of a werewolf pack? Is that what you're saying?
I know this is crazy, right?
I'm shocked.
So back then I was just like this really shy, very introverted person, and all of my inner thoughts. And so that was my way of writing that book. However, as you grow, you approach this genre in different ways, especially romance, because romance is something that most of us experience in different stages in life. So, when I first experienced it, it was very different from what I thought it was.
There was no
Very
growling.
different. Yeah. And then I found myself writing a book, kind of, a romance book that kind of ends on a really bad note
Oh.
because that romance of mine ended on a bad note. And I was like, no one is going to be happy, not even my
Oh
character.
wow. I imagine you going back and rewriting a happy ending, like why should they be happy?
Oh, no,
Uh,
no. Once I'm happy, I don't go and change endings that way.
so how do you build tension between characters?
Well,
We're talking about sexual tension, romantic
yeah, yeah, yeah.
tension.
So usually, between two characters, it can be I first establish their characters first. I mean, I establish in the Millennium Wolf's case, the female character is very stubborn, very bullheaded, very narrow-minded in a way.
She's a
While,
redhead.
yeah, she's a redhead. And the male character is more of a down-to-earth kind of guy, but still somewhat stubborn. And because two stubborn people butt heads, that's kind of how it goes. So I kind of, once I set down the characteristics of these characters, I just let them write themselves in a way because I
Mm.
understood them so deeply that I understood how their dynamic is going to work. It's not something that I can really put into words, and I don't think you should, It's sometimes you just need to understand your characters to the core and just let them lead you. And yes, it's about sexual tension as well, because, I knew that these two are going to end up together or whatever, yada yada, but I mean, I knew that the way there is going to be, yeah. So I just let them, write it themselves and just like be stupid and idiotic and cool and funny and whatever. But it all depends on how well you know your characters, and it's not just about like building sexual tension, but any sort of dynamic between characters. You just need to understand your characters. I hope that makes sense.
No, it definitely did. I do think that once you've established characters firmly, at least in your mind, you don't even have to write it down.
Yeah.
Then things just sort of happen.
Yeah.
Early in my writing career, I thought like a character can't surprise me. I am the adult in the room. What do you mean? But
Oh.
but then I then I started making character sheets, and I'm like, oh wait, what are you doing? No, okay, I'll just follow you and see what you're up to. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's fun in a way to lose control like that.
Yeah, I was supposed, by the way, that reminds me that in the current book that I'm working on, in its original draft, I killed one of the characters off because I didn't believe that they had anything else to add to the story beyond a certain point. However, when I started working on it, editing it, and rewriting parts and everything, I found myself just like being,
That's
oh my
that's kind of
God,
awkward, isn't it? Like, I know I killed you, but would you mind hopping back?
no. Yeah, so I was like, no, you're not going to die yet. You're too evil for that. Let's do some other
Ooh,
stuff with you.
lovely. Um, I just want to ask, you've read a lot of fantasy and romance, I guess, and I'm sure actually. Um, are there any tropes that you think an aspiring writer of romance, not even romance in fantasy, but romance in general, are there any tropes we should avoid?
Yes. There are many of them. Where do I
Just in
start?
case the video version doesn't come up, listeners, you missed a really great expression by Sapir. She was like, "Oh, hell yes." Anyway,
I mean, it would be even easier if I said which tropes you should do,
okay, sure.
Because, okay, so romance tropes tend to be very hectic, very, and they're not, usually they are not executed well. In a lot of times, the, more boring or vanilla kind of romance tropes are the ones that work the best because no one needs to think too much about writing them, such as friends to lovers, like childhood friends becoming lovers in later lives, or,
You've
you
just
know,
attacked like 90% of animes, basically.
oh yes, I do.
We
It's not
we love
very
animes on the pod. We just,
Yeah, yeah, I love animes as well. And yes, I attack them because it's the same old thing. And it's like, yeah, well, it's very easy to write because your characters already know each other. So it's only
he
just about pumping out the sexual tension,
yeah, he saved her when she was 5 years old from a bunch of bullies, and then he promised to marry her, and he forgot, and now she's really pretty.
I hate this trope so much. I mean, friends to lovers I think it's my personal pet peeve, to be honest.
Which is ironic because in life, that's a very solid way to start your relationship.
Yes, but like in romance novels, I want to be with the couple right from the beginning. And that means that from the moment they meet each other until the moment
They
they
die in each other's arms.
yes, but like I want them to, I mean, it can also happen when you like follow a character since they were children and everything, if you talk about childhood friends to lovers, but it just lacks.
Ooh, I see what you mean. You don't mind the childhood friendship. You just don't want it to be like a cop out, like an off-screen
Yes,
thing. Like, oh, you don't
yes,
know that, but they're already kind of into each other. I was too lazy to write it, so it happened. You weren't there.
yes.
I
I
see.
want to see this stuff happening. I'm nosy. I like just, I like seeing this stuff, but obviously, I mean, it's not my favorite trope, but when done right, it can be done right in that regard. But if it's all off screen and then you just meet the characters when they're like, yeah, we like each other, but we won't tell each other because we reasons, then it's like, so what are we here for? I want the falling in love. I want the being friends.
Wow. One more thing I wanted to ask you about Millennium Wolves. You did something really interesting because a lot of the times in writing, we can milk a lot of tension from misunderstandings or the things that we don't know. Now, in romance novels, it can come into effect where we know what one character is thinking, but we don't exactly know what the other character is thinking. Like, we know that the knight is really, attracted to the princess, but we have no idea if she sees him as anything more than a bodyguard. Or the
Yeah.
opposite, the princess likes the knight, but she doesn't know if he sees her as anything more than job. In your novel, we actually get to see what both characters think because each of them gets their own chapter. And we kind of do this back and forth. Is it something you would still do if you rewrote the book? And if yes, what do you think is the strength of that approach?
So that's a complicated question, and I'm going to divide it into a few parts. So bear with me. The original draft of the Millennium Wolves included only the female character's point of view.
Oh, wow. I didn't. Okay.
Yes, I was like, all my books up until the recent book that I'm working on right now only included one character's point of view, usually the woman, because, when Millennium Wolves got to be published, basically, my publishers thought that it was not long enough. And that's why they told me, yeah, we think that, maybe you or we or whoever need to, like, we can add, like, the point of view of another character, say the other main character.
I'll just say that because of the nature of the app, longer novel means more profit for the
Yes.
publisher.
Yes, that's very true. And I debated it. I did not exactly like the idea initially because I like to just be in the dark when it comes to things. I like being in just one character's state of mind and whatever. This is why even in my current book, when I write the other person's point of view, first of all, there are like only 2 chapters of that. And second of all, it's in third person and it keeps the mystery
It's
still.
more distant, yeah.
Yes, but in this case, I was talked into doing this in many ways.
Okay.
And I just did it. And, I don't know how I feel about it still to this day. But it's kind of like the hazards of publishing, I guess. Sometimes you do stuff that you don't want to. And I think I came to be at peace with it.
I gotta say, I really enjoyed the Aiden point of view. I didn't butcher the name, did I?
No.
Because it's like, in these video games like Warcraft 3, where the map is dark and as you walk, there's more light.
Yeah.
Suddenly, when I got his point of view, it's like a huge chunk of the map just got, blasted with light. And suddenly I felt like I knew so much more about this world and the characters. And I think it made Eden more interesting because before that he was just this really, 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 really handsome guy. And now he's like a person with concerns and a challenger who's his best friend. I don't want to spoil it, read the book, but you do learn about the kind of stuff that bother Mr. Perfect, which make him immensely more interesting.
Yes, that's again something that because the original draft was all the characters were kind of one-dimensional in that draft. I don't even bother denying that. And Aiden too came off as like this really, I'm a male, I'm an alpha, I'm gonna fuck you, all
I
these
wish you
things.
could see her expressions. Sorry.
So nowadays, let's say again, I wrote this book 9 years ago. Nowadays, I understand there is the need sometimes to have this point of views and to soften a character and show other layers.
Well, I think it worked out pretty well, but hindsight is 2020.
Oh yes.
I will just say you have a really cool thing in your book. You got those scene breaks. Now, most of the time, scene breaks are just like 3 hashtags or 3, beautiful sigils. But your scene breaks are actually text chains, which I absolutely adored because some of them are so cringy and in the best possible way. It felt like a loading screen in a video game that's meant to entertain you.
Yeah.
So how did you get the idea for those?
Yeah, so those were not actually my ideas. It was my publishers.
Okay, let's give the credit. Okay.
Yes, I give the credit when credit is due. I mean, these text messages, most of them did not exist in the original version. Some of them did, but in a different way. But since the app has its own, formatting thing, so they said, yeah, we can do these text messages and it can be like really engaging for readers. And on the app, you can actually see it like an iPhone screen with text messages. So that's pretty cool. And I'm really happy that they did that. I think it's really adding to the whole vibe of this book. And it can only work on an app for sure. Like, I don't think that, I mean, it can work. I mean, I saw books with this kind of writing in traditional publishing, but on an app, it just seems more authentic because you have all this screen, the iPhone screen, and all the layout and everything. So kudos to the publisher for doing that.
Speaking of publishers, I feel like a lot of writers, when they are made aware of the business side of things, they either hide in a cave or they pretend not to hear you. Like, it really scares a lot of us, the fact that one day it's not enough to just write a book, you actually have to sell the thing. And I just wanted to ask, you've had a lot of time in the business side of things. You've been with publishers, lawyers, agents, contracts,
Yeah.
book launches, festivals, probably a lot of other things. What advice would you give a writer about the business side? Okay, let's make it more specific. You can go back in time and talk to 17-year-old Sapir. Like, what do you tell her about the business side of things?
I would tell her to never, ever take these things on her own.
Ooh.
I mean, I'm not a business wave, kind of person. I loathe the business part of this industry. And honestly, this whole business part of this industry made me have like a really long-term writer's block myself.
Hmm.
It was really hard to kind of balance the two, like knowing that I need to be on top of all the business stuff while still writing and doing, my thing. Um, yeah, the business part is never fun. It's not fun for people like us, I guess, that all we want is just write and be left alone. And then there's people who come and say, yeah, you need to sign this, and that, but then you need to take it to the lawyer, and the lawyer needs to tell you this, and the agent tells you that, and it's a whole whirlwind of stuff that you really don't care about, but need to care about because in the end, it's your craft, it's your money, it's your publishing, So I hate that. I honestly, I don't have a good advice for that. It's just something that all of us need to go through. And while it's scary, it's in the end, it's worth it. In the end, worth it. You get a lot from that experience. And again, without the business aspect of things, your book will never be out there. The business aspect is inseparable from that. So swallow your tongue, brace yourself, and get in there, honestly, because there's no other way to do this unless you're a business swavey kind of person.
Basically, chin up and into the fire you go.
But don't let it discourage you from going that direction, because at the end, as I said, it's all worth it, and you would regret it if you didn't.
Well, that is advice, isn't it? Don't let it discourage you.
Yeah, I guess, in a way.
I got to experience both sides, traditional publishing and self-publishing. Precipice Fiction is an indie publisher. We are not part of the big five or any of their branches. And we did publish by ourselves. Luckily, I'm part of a team that is just full of really responsible and talented people. So I never really felt the burden as much as I would have had I self-published myself. And I did get to sell my stories to people who are magazines and publishers, and they did the heavy lifting for me. But I think in today's world, it is getting harder and harder to say, oh, self-publishing is not for me without having a proper look at it. You kind of got to experience all of it. You got this very unique publishing situation with the app, but also traditional publishing. Would you recommend that a writer aims at one or the other, or just focus on the writing and when the time's right?
I think it depends on circumstances, to be honest. I was basically in the right place at the right time when the whole thing with the app happened. If I were to know what I know today and go back to that time, I don't know if I would have gone for it. Not that I regret it. It's just that, you know, experience makes you smarter. But I think it really depends. I mean, I can say on the very, very legal stuff, usually online apps in general do not give advances, they only give royalties, okay? So, I mean, some of them do give advances, but very minor ones. They give royalties, and there is the whole exclusive, non-exclusive kind of clause that can be a pain in the fucking neck. Just saying. And you really need to be careful with online apps when you sign anything with them. I mean, they're not bad and they're not fraudulent usually, but the publishing houses, especially online publishing houses, have their own interests, and sometimes those interests do not align with yours. So you really need to be on top of things if you go that route. You can also go, the traditional publishing route, which is, the one that we all know and either love or hate. The whole new online platforms that have been rising in the past few years and become like very prominent in the publishing industry. Let's say that I have my own lawyer, okay? He's from Los Angeles, and he belongs to a law firm that has a really big entertainment division. And even they say that this whole online publishing apps era is just in its, inception in many ways. So it's still kind of risky to take this risk, but it's also it can be very, fulfilling and profiting. Like, I experienced that part, but I also experienced some other parts, and all I can say in that regard is that if you're new to the publishing world and you thinking, where should I, start? I think that online publishing apps can be very good for you, but don't be nonchalant about it. Like, take a lawyer, make sure that the contract is fair, and don't sign anything, absolutely anything, that might seem even a bit off.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. You start something new, you're first to the plate, but also it's untested, and some of the hazards are not well known. But I do feel like, in general, you did have this immense success with the app. You got to so many readers. You have a lot of fans in the world, and in a way, it kind of directed you to the safe harbor-ish of traditional publishing.
Yes, I want to just note on that. I mean, again, I give credit to the app, and yes, because of them, I managed to get, to traditional publishing and everything. Which is not necessarily something that would have happened without me being on that app before,
I'd like to say that I think it would, because you're very good, but sure.
Oh, thank you. But no one knows that because,
No, nobody knows it.
Yes. So I do owe it to the app, but it's not without criticism. I mean, every publishing house will have their own fair share of criticism. And I just want to say that it's not all rainbows and sunshine on the even though it looks like it. Like, don't be jealous until you're in that point.
On the unlikely case that you didn't yet think writing is hard, then there you go. You got a few more reasons to think it is hard.
No, I don't think it affects the writing part. It's just the business part that is very
the business
much.
part. I really wanted to ask you about your writing process. First, because I find you ultra productive. And second, because this is a podcast for emerging writers, and I think they would love to know. You did mention a writer's block earlier in our conversation, and you have emerged on the other side.
Okay, so writer's block is a whole topic. I've had many writer's blocks, and in my case, they can last for more than months. Like, the last writing blocks that I had was 2 years. And in those 2 years, because I'm a very dramatic person, in those 2 years, I believe that I will never write again. I believe that my writing career is over. How can I be a writer if I cannot go over my writer's block? And, I started
the writer's wall.
Oh, fuck, yeah. But it was a titanium wall, and I was just like lost in like the whole angsty part of this. However, a few years ago, I saw this video on YouTube. Like, there are a lot of YouTube videos about like how to get over your writer's block, and none of them really helps because how it is. However, there was one video. It was like 3 minutes long. I don't even remember. I don't even know if it's still up there. I haven't seen this ever since, but I only needed to see it once to take one thing away from it that helps me and still helps me to this day. They said a lot of stuff, the person in that video, about, you just need to write, you just need to, and all the stuff that really don't help. But then he said something that it's on the surface, it sounds very like, yeah, well, of course. But when you think about it deeply enough, you realize that you don't do that. And that means do not criticize yourself as you write. Meaning that when you write, and like you get stuck because you're like, no, this last chapter was really bad, or this last sentence does not work, and I cannot write anymore, and blah, blah, blah. Don't fret.
It's one of these things that is so simple.
Yes.
And so, I don't want to say easy to apply, but so straightforward to apply.
Yes. And I don't say that it always works, but it does help sometimes that when you are in this spot and you're just being like, I don't think I can do this anymore. And you're like, yeah, but it doesn't have to be perfect. It's only for your eyes. It's only you who sees that at the moment.
Something that really helped me with my writing block. I recently moved. Is that recently? 2 years ago, I moved from Sydney, Australia to Tel Aviv, Israel, after spending the better part of 5 years in Australia. And before the move, I was really hitting my stride with this novel. I had a good momentum. And then the move happened, and I wasn't particularly sad or anything, but so much had happened in my life. A new job, my wife had to learn the language because she's not originally from Israel. And I just didn't write. I tried in bits and pieces, and I remember I really wanted to make it like Saturday. Saturday would be the writing day. And what happened is because none of the other days was a writing day, by the time I arrived at Saturday, I had this huge, roaring dread inside my stomach. Okay, one more day left, 5 hours left until writing day. Oh my God, I woke up. It's officially writing day. Well, not until I had my coffee. Okay, now it's writing day. And I just wouldn't write because I was terrified because it's now or never. And then Saturday would end and I would feel bad.
Yeah, I think that the biggest part of writer's block is do not blame yourself. And not like say, oh my God, you promised yourself you're going to do this. And then just, it's like doing when you don't do homework for school, okay? You don't do this homework.
Just to say, our students never do their homeworks. They never look like they're upset about it.
Yeah, well, the students that we have are Gen Z.
Special, just in case you listen. You're great. Love you guys. Memorize your words for the test. Anyway.
I'm not your teacher anymore. I hate you. Anyway.
I just wanted to say what really helped me with that is that I have this book that Ali Burnham from Precipice Fiction, or was it Phoenix? One of them recommended me this book called Bird by Bird. It's a book about writing. I'm so sorry I can't remember the name of the writer. It's a fantastic book. And she just says somewhere in the pages, just forgive yourself and write the shitty first draft. Just let it go. Once you write the shitty first draft, first of all, like Sapir said, no one has to see it. Just let it out. Then you fix the hell up. But let out those, that first version of your writing. Don't criticize yourself, like you said, while you're writing, because that's just really counterproductive.
Yeah, I mean, it just slows everything down, and then you can just drown in your own despair with no way out. And you don't want that. You really don't.
I would love to do a podcast with you. We're just being depressed about it, like just letting it all out.
Oh wow, I can do that for days on end.
Okay, we'll meet for a drink sometimes in the next few days and let it out. The final thing I really wanted to ask you, first of all, your advice has been amazing. What writing advice would you give? Like we did the negative stuff, how you deal with writer's block, but what's the biggest writing advice that you learned the hard way and you'd be kind enough to impart on our listeners?
Honestly, I don't think it's about learning anything. I just know that the human way is to get better with practice. And, the more I wrote, the more I realized how better I got, I mean, I can go back to when I was 15 years old and finished my first book in Hebrew. And then I see that and I'm like, yeah, I'm not there anymore. So the only thing that I learned is persistence, basically. Like, if you really want to write, if you really want to be a writer, or even a published writer, whatever, or even if it's just for writing for yourself, but if you want that, all you have to do is just keep the practice going. Like, because if you stop, you can always go back to it, but it just, how do I say this? You won't get better unless you practice, like in everything else. Like when you play the piano, you need to practice to get better at it. And the only thing that I learned is that keep up the practice. There is really no other way to write other than writing.
That's philosophical. Like the only way to write is to write.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. Of course, nowadays there are like other ways to write,
but it's true. It is true.
But it's true. Like you can't get any like shortcuts. You don't have shortcuts when you write. It's either you write or you don't. There is no middle ground.
And oftentimes you can only get to the good writing after you got the bad writing out of the way, and it's part of the process.
Yes, it's part of the process. And maybe sometimes, you're lucky enough that your first draft is this amazing masterpiece that you don't need to edit whatsoever. But don't strive to do that, because perfect is not even fun. I don't know. I like when my writing is bad sometimes. I'm like, yeah, this is so shitty. How can I make it
Love
better?
it. Sapir, this has been amazing. I just want to ask, for the sake of our listeners who have not yet gotten the chance to read your stuff, where can we find your materials? Please feel free to plug whatever you're working on at the moment. And just the final thing, so you don't forget the other things I asked. Will we ever get a Millennium Wolves movie or show, or is that ever going to happen?
Well, for when you can get to read my stuff, at least the Millennium Wolves, you can read online on the app Galatea, which is available for both Android and iOS. Will soon be able to read the current book that I'm working on. It's a very hush-hush situation, but there has been some deals in the making, and
what is it about? Can we get something?
What it is about? Well, vampires, because why not? And but it's kind of like a dark twist on vampires that I don't think anyone did so far, from what I read at least. I hope that they bring something new to the table at least. So yeah, that is in the papers. If you want to follow me, I have my Instagram because I'm such a millennial. Woo! So yes, I have an Instagram, I have TikTok, which I don't update, but you can always follow. Yeah, and I also have my Facebook page. Just write my name and you should find me, I guess. I also have a website if you want to see that. It's not that interesting. But yeah, this is it.
And how about that movie? Is that
movie? Well, all I can say in that regard is that many producers have already reached out to me in the past couple of years. And so far, in the foreseeable future, there's not any, there aren't any plans. However, it's, it can always change. So keep an eye out, maybe.
Well, you heard it here first. Maybe it's coming. Sapir, you've been amazing. It's really fun that I finally get to share you with the podcast, because I've known you for a while. Thank you for coming on, and for all of you listeners, thank you for listening, and see you around.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.